6. He took Ramona to her shop after breakfast. She was wearing a tight red dress, and they were hugging and kissing in the taxi. Moses was stirred and laughed a great deal, saying to himself more than once how lovely she was. And I'm making it. On Lexington Avenue, he got out with her, and they embraced on the sidewalk. Since when did middle-aged men behave so passionately in public places? Ramona's rouge was superfluous. Her face was glowing, even burning, and she pressed him with her breast as she kissed him. The waiting cabby and Miss Schwartz, Ramona's assistant, both were watching. Was this perhaps the way to live? He wondered. Had he had trouble enough, and paid his debt to suffering, and earned the right to ignore what anyone might think? He clasped Ramona closer, felt that she was swelling, bursting, heart in the body in the tight-fitted red dress. She gave him still another perfumed kiss. On the sidewalk before the window of her shop were daisies, lilacs, small roses, flats with tomato and pepper seedlings for transplanting, all freshly watered. There stood the green pot with its perforated brass spout. Drops of water assumed blurred shapes on the cement. In spite of the buses, which glazed the air with stinking gases, he could smell the fresh odor of soil, and he heard the women passing by, the rapid knocking of their heels on the crusty pavement. So between the amusement of the cabby and the barely controlled censure of Miss Schwartz's eyes behind the leaves, he went on kissing Ramona's painted, fragrant face. Within the great open trench of Lexington Avenue, the buses pouring poison, but the flowers surviving, garnet roses, pale lilacs, the cleanliness of the white, the luxury of the red, and everything covered by the gold overcast of New York. Here on the street, as far as character and disposition permitted, he had a taste of life he might have led if he had been simply a loving creature. But as soon as he was alone in the rattling cab, he was again the inescapable Moses, Elkanah Herzog. Oh, what a thing I am, what a thing! His driver raced the lights on Park Avenue, and Herzog considered what matters were like. I fall upon the thorns of life, I bleed, and then I fall upon the thorns of life, I bleed, and what's next? I get laid, I take a short holiday, but very soon I fall upon those same thorns with gratification, in pain or suffering in joy. Who knows what the mixture is? What good, what lasting good is there in me? Is there nothing else between birth and death, and what I can get out of this perversity? Only a favorable balance of disorderly emotions. No freedom, only impulses. And what about all the good I have in my heart? Doesn't it mean anything? Is it simply a joke? A false hope that makes a man feel the illusion of worth. And so he goes on with his struggles. But this good is no phony. I know it isn't. I swear it. Again, he was greatly excited. His hands shook as he opened the door of his apartment. He felt he might do something practical and useful, and must do it at once. His night with Ramona had given him new strength, and his strength itself revived his fears. And with the rest, the fear that he might break down, that these strong feelings might disorganize him utterly. He took off his shoes, his jacket, loosened his collar, opened his front room windows. Warm currents of air with the slightly contaminated odor of the harbor lifted his shabby curtains and the window shade. This flow of air calmed him slightly. No, the good in his heart evidently didn't count for much. For here, at the age of 47, he was coming home after a night out with a lip made sore by biting and kissing. his problems as unsolved as ever, and what else did he have to show for himself at the bar of judgment? He had had 2 wives. There were 2 children. He had once been a scholar, and in the close closet his old valise was swelled like a scaly crocodile with his uncompleted manuscript. While he delayed, others came up with the same ideas. 2 years ago, a Berkeley professor named Marmelstein had scooped him, confounding, overwhelming, stunning everyone in the field, as Herzog had meant to do. Marmelstein was a clever man and an excellent scholar. At least he must be free from personal drama and able to give the world an example of order, thus deserving a place in the human community. But he, Herzog, had committed a sin of some kind against his own heart, while in pursuit of a grand synthesis. What his country needs is a good 5-cent synthesis. What a catalogue of errors! Take his sexual struggles, for instance. Completely wrong. Herzog, going to brew himself some coffee, blushed as he measured the water in the graduated cup. It's the hysterical individual who allows his wife to be polarized by simple extreme antitheses, like strength, weakness, potency, importance, health, sickness. He feels challenged but unable to struggle with social injustice, too weak, so he struggles with women, with children, with his unhappiness. Take a case like that poor George Hoberly. Hoberly, that sobbing prick. Herzog washed off the ring inside his coffee cup. Why did Hoberly rush in a fever to the luxury shops of New York for intimate gifts, for tributes to Ramona? Because he was crushed by failure. See how a man will submit his whole life to some extreme endeavor, often crippling, even killing himself in his chosen sphere. Now that it can't be political, it's sexual. Maybe Hoberly felt he had not satisfied her in bed. But that didn't seem likely either. Trouble with the member, even a case of ejaculatio praecox, would not throw a woman like Ramona. If anything, such humiliations would challenge or intrigue her, bring her to her generosity. No, Ramona was humane. She simply didn't want this desperate character to cast all his burdens on her. It's possible that a man like Hoberly, by falling apart, intends to bear witness to the failure of individual existence. He proves it can't work. He pushes love to the point of absurdity to discredit it forever, and in that way prepares to serve the Leviathan of organization even more devoutly. But another possibility was that a man bursting with unrecognized needs, imperatives, desires for activity, for brotherhood, desperate with longing for reality, for God, could not wait but threw himself wildly upon anything resembling a hope. And Ramona did look like hope. She chose to. Herzog knew how that was, since he himself had sometimes given people hope, emitting a secret message, "Rely on me." This was probably a matter simply of instinct, of health or vitality. It was his vitality that led a man from lie to lie, or induced him to hold out hopes to others. Destructiveness created lies of its own, but that was another matter. What I seem to do, thought Herzog, is to inflame myself with my drama, with ridicule, failure, denunciation, distortion, to inflame myself voluptuously, aesthetically, until I reach a sexual climax. And that climax looks like a resolution and an answer to many higher problems. Insofar as I can trust Ramona in the role of prophetess, it is that. She has read Marcuse, N. Oh, Brown, all those Neo-Freudians. She wants me to believe the body is a spiritual fact, the instrument of the soul. Ramona is a dear woman, and very touching, but this theorizing is a dangerous temptation. It can only lead to more high-minded mistakes. He watched the coffee beating in the cracked dome of the percolator, comparable to the thoughts in his skull. When the brew looked dark enough, he filled his cup and breathed in the fumes. He decided to write Daisy, saying that he would visit Marco on Parents' Day, not plead weakness. Enough malingering. He decided also that he must have a talk with lawyer Simpkin immediately. He ought to have phoned Simpkin earlier, knowing his habits. The ruddy, stout, Machiavellian old bachelor lived with his mother and a widowed sister and several nephews and nieces on Central Park West. The apartment itself was luxurious, but he slept on an army cot in the smallest of the rooms. His night table was a pile of legal volumes, and here he worked and read, far into the night. The walls were covered from top to bottom by abstract expressionist paintings unframed. At 6, Simpkin rose from his cot and drove his Thunderbird to a small East Side restaurant. He found out the most authentic places, Chinese, Greek, Burmese, the darkest cellars in New York. Herzog had often eaten with him. After a breakfast of onion rolls and Nova Scotia, Simpkin liked to lie down on the black Naugahyde sofa in his office, cover himself with an Afghan knitted by his mother, listening to Palestrina Monteverdi as he elaborated his legal and business strategies. At 8 or so, he shaved his large cheeks with Norelco, and by 9, having left instructions for his staff, he was out, visiting galleries, attending auctions. Herzog dialed and found Simpkin in. At once, it was a ritual. Simpkin began complaining. It was June, the month for weddings. 2 junior members of the firm were absent. Honeymooning. What idiots. Well, Professor, he said, I haven't seen you in a while. What's on your mind? First, Harvey, I ought to ask whether you can advise me. You are a friend of Madeline's family, after all. Let's say instead that I have a relationship with them. For you, I have sympathy. No Pontryter needs my sympathy, least of all Madeline, that bitch. Recommend another lawyer if you want to keep out of it. Lawyers can be expensive. You aren't rolling in money. I take it. Of course, Herzog reflected. Harvey is curious. He'd like to know as much as possible about my situation. Am I being sensible? Ramona wants me to consult her lawyer, but that might commit me to something else again. Besides, her lawyer would want to protect Ramona from me. When are you free, Harvey? Said Herzog. Listen, I picked up 2 paintings by a Yugoslavian primitive, Pakchik. He's just in from Brazil. Can we meet for lunch? Not today. Lately the angel of death has taken charge. Herzog recognized the peculiar notes of Jewish comedy that Simpkin loved, his elaborate shows of dread, his cosmic mock dismay. Getting and spending, I lay waste my powers, Simpkin went on. Half an hour. Let's have dinner at Marcario's. I'll bet you never even heard of it. I thought not. You are a hick. He shouted harshly to his secretary. Bring me that column Earl Wilson wrote about Macario. You hear me, Tilly? Are you busy all day long? I have to go to court. Those schmucks are in Bermuda with their brides while I fight the Molokhomovas alone. Do you know what you pay for one serving of spaghetti al burro at Macario's? Guess. I must go along, Herzog reflected. He rubbed his brows with thumb and forefinger. $3.50? Is that your idea of expensive? $5.50. My God, what do they put in it? Sprinkled with gold dust, not cheese. No, seriously, I have to try a case today, I myself, and I loathe courtrooms. Let me pick you up in a cab and drive you downtown. I'll be right over. But I'm waiting for the client here. I'll tell you what, if I have a few minutes to spare later, you sound very nervous. My cousin Waschel is in the district attorney's office. I'll leave word with him. Well, as long as my guy isn't here yet, why don't you tell me what it's all about? It's about my daughter. You want to sue for custody? Not necessarily. I'm concerned about her. I don't know how the child is. Besides which, you'd like to get revenge, I imagine. I send the support money regularly and always ask after June, but never a word in reply. Himmelstein, the lawyer in Chicago, said I wouldn't stand a chance in a custody suit. But I don't know how the girl is being brought up. I do know they shut her up in the car when she bothers them. How far do they go? Do you think Madeline is an unfit mother? Of course I think so, but I hesitate to rush between the kid and her mother. Is she living with this guy, your buddy? Remember when you were running away to Poland last year and made your will? You named him executor and guardian. I did, yes, I remember now. I guess I did. He could hear the lawyer coughing, and he knew it was a feigned cough. Simpkin was laughing. You could hardly blame him. Herzog himself was somewhat amused by his sentimental faith in best friends, and could not help thinking how much he must have added to Gersbach's pleasure by his gullibility. Obviously, thought Moses, I wasn't fit to look after my own interest, and proved my incompetence every day. A stupid prick. I was kind of surprised when you named him, said Simpkin. Why did you know everything? No, but there was something... Why, did you know anything? No, but there was something about his looks. His clothes, his loud voice, and his phony Yiddish. And such an exhibitionist. I didn't like the way he hugged you. Even kissed you, if I recall. That's his exuberant Russian personality. Oh, I'm not saying he's queer exactly, Simpkin said. Well, is Madeline shacked up with this gorgeous guardian? You could at least investigate. Why don't you hire a private investigator? A detective? Of course. The idea grabs you? It certainly does. Why didn't I think of that myself? Do you have the kind of money that takes? Now that's real money. I go back to work in a few months. Even so, what can you earn? Simpkin always spoke of Moses earning with a ring of sadness. Poor intellectual, so badly treated. He seemed to wonder why Herzog did not resent this, but Herzog still accepted depression standards. I can borrow. Private investigation cost a tremendous amount. I'll explain it to you. He paused. The big corporations have created a new aristocracy under the present tax structure. Cars, planes, hotel suites, fringe benefits. Also restaurants, theaters, etc. Good private schools have been priced out of range for the low-salaried man. Even the cost of prostitution. The deductible medical expense has enriched psychiatrists. So even suffering cost more now. As for the various dodges in insurance, real estate, etc. I could tell you about them too. Everything is subtler. Large organizations have their own CIA, scientific spies who steal secrets from other corporations. Anyhow, detectives get big fees from the carriage trade, so that when you low-income fellows come along, you have to deal with the worst element in this racket. Many a plain blackmailer calls himself a private investigator. Now I could give you a piece of useful advice. Do you want it? Yes, I do, but Herzog hesitated. But what's my angle? Simpkin, as Herzog had intended, put the question for him. I suppose you're the only person in New York who doesn't know how Madeline turned on me. Such slanders. And I was like an uncle to her, living in lofts among those theater types. The child was like a frightened puppy. I took pity on Maddie. I gave her dolls. I took her to the circus. When she was old enough to enter Radcliffe, I paid for her wardrobe. But then, when she was converted by that dude, Monsignor, I tried to talk to her, and she called me a hypocrite and crook. She said I was a social climber, using her father's connections, and nothing but an ignorant Jew. Ignorant! I took the Latin medal at Boys High in 1917. All right. But then she injured a little cousin of mine, an epileptic girl, a sickly, immature, innocent, frail mouse of a woman who couldn't take care of herself. Never mind the awful details. What did she do? That's another long story. So you're not protecting Madeline anymore. I didn't hear what she said against you. Maybe you don't remember it. She gave me some pretty sharp wounds, believe me. Never mind that. I'm a greedy old money grubber. I don't claim I'm a candidate for sainthood, but, well, that's just the frenzy of the world. Maybe you don't always take cognizance. Professor being absorbed in the true and the good and the beautiful like air goeth. Okay, Harvey, I know, I'm not a realist. I haven't got the strength to make all the judgments a man must make to be realistic. What advice were you going to give me? Here's something to think about. As long as my stinking client hasn't arrived, if you really want to bring suit, Himmelstein said a jury would take one look at my gray hairs and give a verdict against me. Perhaps I could dye my hair. Get a clean-cut Gentile lawyer from one of the big firms. Don't have a lot of Jews yelling in the court. Give your case dignity. Then you subpoena all the principals. Again. Get a clean-cut Gentile lawyer from one of the big firms. Don't have a lot of Jews yelling in the court. Give your case dignity. Then you subpoena all the principals, Madeline Gersbach, Mrs. Gersbach, and put them on the stand under oath. Warn them of perjury. If the questions are asked in the right way, and I'm willing to coach your clean-cut lawyer and mastermind the whole trial, you'll never have to touch a hair of your head. With his sleeve, Herzog wiped the sweat that broke out on his forehead. He was suddenly very hot. The heat, which pricked his skin, also released the scent of Ramona's body, which he had absorbed. It was mixed with his own odors. Are you with me? I'm listening. Go on, said Herzog. They'll have to come clean, and they themselves will make your whole case for you. We can ask Gersbach when this affair with Madeline started, how he got you to bring him to the Midwest. You did, didn't you? I got him the job. I rented the house for them. I arranged to have the garbage disposal unit installed in the sink. I measured the windows so that Phoebe could decide whether to bring her drapes from Massachusetts. Simpkin made one of his token exclamations of astonishment. Well, which woman is he living with? That I don't really know. I'd like to confront him myself. Could I conduct the examination in court? That's not feasible, but the lawyer can ask your questions for you. You could crucify that cripple. And Madeline, she's had it all her own way so far. It never enters her mind that you have any rights. Wouldn't she come down to earth with a bang? I often think, if she died, I'd get my daughter back. There are times when I know I could look at Madeline's corpse without pity. They tried to murder you, Simpkins said. In a manner of speaking, they meant to. Herzog sensed that his words were about Madeline's death had excited Simpkin and made him eager to hear more. He wants me to say that I actually feel capable of murdering them both. Well, it's true. I've tested it in my mind with a gun, a knife, and felt no horror, no guilt. None. And I could never imagine such a crime before. So perhaps I might kill them. But I'll say no such thing to Harvey. Simpkin went on. In court, you must prove that they have an adulterous relationship to which the child is exposed. In itself, sexual intimacy doesn't count. An Illinois court gave custody to a call girl, the mother, because whatever tricks she performed, she saved them for hotel rooms. The courts don't expect to stop the whole sexual revolution of our time. But if the fucking is at home and the child exposed to it, the judicial attitude is different. Damage to the little psyche. Herzog listened, looking through the window with a hard gaze, and tried to master the spasms of his stomach and the twisted, knotted sensations of his heart. The telephone seemed to pick up the sound of his blood, rhythmic, thin, and quick, washing within his skull. Perhaps it was only a nervous reflex of his eardrums. The membranes appeared to shiver. Understand, said Simpkin. It would hit all the Chicago papers. I've got nothing to lose. I'm practically forgotten in Chicago. The scandal would hit Gersbach, not me, said Herzog. How do you figure? He's on the make everywhere, and cultivates all the Chicago hotshots, clergymen, newspapermen, professors, television guys, federal judges, Hadassah ladies. Jesus Christ, he never lets up. He organizes new combinations on television, like Paul Tillich and Malcolm X and Haida Hopper on one program. I thought the fellow was a poet and a radio announcer. Now he sounds like a TV impresario. He's a poet in mass communications. He really has got you, hasn't he? By golly, if this isn't something in your bloodstream. Well, how would you like it if you woke up to see that all your best tries were nothing but sleepwalking? But I don't understand this Gersbach's game. I'll tell you. He's a ringmaster, popularizer, liaison for the elites. He grabs up celebrities and brings them before the public. And he makes all sorts of people feel like he has exactly what they've been looking for. Subtlety for the subtle. Warmth for the warm. For the crude, crudity. For the crooks, hypocrisy. Atrocity for the atrocious. Whatever your heart desires. Emotional plasma which can circulate in any system. Simpkin was perfectly delighted with such an outburst, Herzog knew. He even understood that the lawyer was winding him up, putting him on. But that did not stop him. I've tried to see him as a type. Is he an Ivan the Terrible? Is he a would-be Rasputin? Or a poor man's Cagliostro? Or a politician, orator, demagogue, rhapsode? Or some kind of Siberian shaman? Those are often transvestites or androgynes. Do you mean to say that those philosophers you've studied for so many years are all frustrated by one Valentine Gersbach? said Simpkin. "All those years of Spinoza, Hegel?" "You're ribbing me, Simpkin. Sorry, that wasn't a good joke. I don't mind. It seems true. Like taking swimming lessons on the kitchen table. Well, I can't answer for the philosophers. Maybe power philosophy. Thomas Hobbes could analyze him. But when I think of Valentine, I don't think of philosophy. I think of the books I devoured as a boy on the French and Russian revolutions. And silent movies like Saint-Gene, Gloria Swanson, or Emile Jannings as the Tsarist general. Anyway, I see the mobs breaking into the palaces and churches and sacking Versailles, wallowing in cream desserts, or pouring wine over their dicks, and dressing in purple velvet, snatching crowns and mitres and crosses. Herzog knew very well, when he talked like this, that he was again in the grip of the eccentric, dangerous force that had been capturing him. It was at work now, and he felt himself bending. At any moment he might hear a crack. He must stop this. He heard Simpkin laughing softly and steadily to himself, with probably one small hand placed in restraint on his fat chest, and wrinkles of cheerful satire in play about his bushy eyes and hairy ears. Emancipation resulting in madness, unlimited freedom to choose and play a tremendous variety of roles with a lot of coarse energy. "I never saw a man pour wine over his dick in any movie. When did you ever see that?" said Simpkin. "At the Museum of Modern Art. Besides, in your mind, you don't identify yourself with Versailles, or the Kremlin, or the old regime, or anything like that, do you?" "No, no, of course not. It's nothing but a metaphor, and probably not a good one. I only meant to say that Gersbach won't let anything go. He tries everything on. For instance, if he took away my wife, did he have to suffer my agony for me, too? Because he could do even that better. And if he's such a tragic love figure, practically a demagogue in his own eyes, does he have to be also the greatest of fathers and family men? His wife says he's an ideal husband. Her only complaint was that he was so horny. She said he was on top of her every night. He couldn't keep up the pace. She couldn't keep up the pace. Who did she complain to? Why, to her best friend, Madeline, of course. Who else? And the truth is that Valentine is a family man, along with everything else. He alone knew how I felt about my kid, and wrote me weekly reports about her faithfully with real kindness. Until I found out, he gave me the grief he was consoling me for." "What did you do then?" "I looked all over Chicago for him. Finally, I sent him a telegram from the airport as I was leaving. I wanted to say that I'd kill him on sight. But Western Union doesn't accept such messages. So I wired 5 words. Dirt enters at the heart. The first letters spell death. I'm sure he was bowled over by the threat. Herzog did not smile. I don't know. He is superstitious. But as I said, he is a family man. He fixes the appliances at home. When the kids needs a snowsuit, he shops for it. He goes to Hillman's basement and brings back rolls and pickled herrings in his shopping bag. In addition, he's a sportsman, college boxing champ at Unonta, despite his wooden leg. He says with pinochle players, He says with pinochle players, he plays pinochle. With rabbis in It's Martin's Buber and the Hyde Park Magical Society, he sings magical. Well, said Simpkin, he's nothing but a psychopath on the make, boastful and exhibitionistic. A bit clinical, maybe, except that he's a recognizable Jewish type. One of those nosy crooks with a booming voice. What kind of car does this promoter poet drive? A Lincoln Continental. But as soon as he slams the door of his Continental, he begins to talk like Karl Marx. I heard him at the auditorium with an audience of 2,000 people. It was a symposium on desegregation, and he let loose a blast against the affluent society. That's how it is. If you got a good job, about 15 grand a year, and health insurance, and a retirement fund, and maybe some stock as well, why shouldn't you be a radical too? Literate people appropriate all the best things they can find in books and dress themselves in them, just as certain crabs are supposed to beautify themselves with seaweed. And then there was the audience, a comfortable audience of conventional business people and professionals who look after their businesses and specialties well enough, but seem confused about everything else and come to hear a speaker express himself confidently, with emphasis and fire, direction, and force. With a head like a flaming furnace, a voice like a bowling alley, and the wooden leg drumming the stage. To me, he's a curiosity, like a Mongolian idiot singing Ada. But to them, "By golly, you are worked up," said Simpkin. "Why are you suddenly talking about the opera? As you describe him, it's perfectly plain to me the fellow is an actor, and I know damn well Madeline is an actress. That I've always realized. But take it easy. This exaggeration is bad for you. You eat yourself alive." Moses was silent, shutting his eyes for a moment. Then he said, "Well, maybe so. Wait up, Moses. I think my client is here." "Oh, all right. I won't keep you. Let's have your cousin's number, and I'll meet you downtown later. This can't wait. No, I have to reach a decision today. Well, I'll try to find a little time. Now, taper off." "I need 15 minutes," said Herzog. "I'll prepare all my questions." Moses, as he took Waschel's number, was thinking that perhaps the best thing he could do was to stop asking people for advice and help. That in itself might change the entire picture. He printed Waschel's number more legibly on the pad. In the background he heard Simpkin shouting rudely at his client, something about an anteater. He unbuttoned his shirt and let it fall behind him to the bathroom floor. Then he ran the water in the sink. The crude oval of the basin was smooth and beautiful in the gray light. He touched the almost homogeneous whiteness with his fingertips, and breathed in the water odors and the subtle stink rising from the throat of the wastepipe. Unexpected intrusions of beauty. This is what life is. He bent his head under the flowing tap and sighed with shock and then with pleasure. "Dear M. de Jovenel, if the aims of political philosophy be, as you say, to civilize power, to impress the brute, to improve the manners, and harness his energy to constructive tasks, I would like to say he has no longer addressing de Jovenel that the sight of James Hoffa on your television show the other night made me realize how terrible a force angry single-mindedness can be. I was sorry for the poor professors on your panel whom he was chewing up. I'll tell you what I would have said to Hoffa. What makes you think realism must be brutal?" Herzog's hands were on the taps. The left now shut off the warm water. The right increased the pressure of the cold. It poured over his scalp and his neck. He was shivering with the extreme violence of thought and feeling. At last he straightened his dripping head and wrapped it in the towel, rubbing and shaking his head in an effort to recover some degree of calm. As he was doing this, it occurred to him that this going into the bathroom to pull himself together was one of his habits. He seemed to feel that here he was more effective, more master of himself. In fact, he remembered for a few weeks in Ludeville he required Madeline to make love on the bathroom floor. She complied, but he could see when she lay down on the cold tiles that she was in a rage. Much good could come of that. This is how the all-powerful human intellect employs itself when it has no real occupation. And now he pictured the November rain dropping from the sky on his half-painted house in Ludeville. The sumacs spilled the red Chinese paper of their leaves, and in the shivering woods the hunters were banging away at the deer, bang, 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 driving home with dead animals. The gun smoke was slow to rise from the wood's edge. Moses knew that in her heart his recumbent wife was cursing him. He tried to make his lust comical, to show how absurd it all was, easily the most wretched form of human struggle, the very essence of slavery. Then suddenly Moses recalled something quite different that had happened to Gerbach's house just outside Barrington about a month later. Gersbach was lighting the Hanukkah candles for his little son, Ephraim, garbling the Hebrew blessing, then dancing with the boy. Ephraim was buttoned into his clumsy sleepers, and Valentine, powerful and gimpy, undaunted by mutilation. That was his huge charm, sulk, because he was a cripple. Screw that. He was dancing, pounding, clapping his hands, his flamboyant hair always brutally barbered at the neck, moving up and down, and he looked at the boy with fanatical tenderness, eyes dark and hot. Whenever that look came over him, the ruddy color of his face seemed to be drawn entirely into his brown eyes, and it made his cheeks seem almost porous. I might have guessed already, from Mattie's look, that spurt of breath that came from her when she laughed spontaneously. That look was deep, strange, a look like a steel binder bent open. She loves that actor. Oneself is simply grotesque. Herzog stated it impulsively, though with pain, and his mind immediately looking for formal stability, catching, as he was lathering, clipping the blade into his injector razor, at ideas of Professor Hawking's latest book. Whether justice on this earth can or cannot be general, social must originate within each heart. Subjective monstrosity must be overcome, must be corrected by community, by useful duty. And, as you indicate, private suffering transformed from masochism. But we know this. We know it. Creative suffering, as you think, at the core of Christian belief. Now, what is that? Herzog urged himself to be clearer. What really is on his mind? What really is on my mind? Probably this. Shall I put those two on the stand under oath, torture them, hold a blowtorch to their feet? Why? They have a right to each other. They seem even to belong together. Why let them alone? But what about justice? Justice. Look who wants justice. Most of mankind has lived and died totally without it. People by the billions and for ages sweated, giped, enslaved, suffocated, bled to death, buried with no more justice than cattle. But Moses E. Herzog, at the top of his lungs, bellowing with pain and anger, has to have justice. It's his quid pro quo, in return for all he has suppressed, his right as an innocent party. I love her, little pussy, her coat is so warm, and I'll sit by the fire and give her some food, and pussy will love me because I am good. So now his rage is so great and deep, so murderous, bloody, positively rapturous, that his arms and fingers ache to strangle them. So much for his boyish purity of heart. Social organization, for all its clumsiness and evil, has accomplished far more and embodies more good than I do, for at least it sometimes gives justice. I am a mess, and I talk about justice. I owe the powers that created me a human life. And where is it? Where is that human life, which is my only excuse for surviving? What have I to show for myself? Only this. His face was before him in the blotchy mirror. It was bearded with lather. He saw his perplexed, furious eyes, and he gave an audible cry. My God! Who is this creature? It considers itself human. But what is it? Not human of itself, but has the longing to be human, and like a troubling dream, a persistent vapor, a desire. Where does it all come from? And what is it? And what can it be? Not immortal longing, no entirely mortal, but human. As he was putting on his shirt, he made plans to visit his son on Parents' Day. The Trailways bus for the Catskill left the West Side Terminal at 7 a.m. and made the trip on the thruway in less than 3 hours. He remembered 2 years ago milling on the dusty playing field with kids and parents and coarse boards of the barracks, the tired goats and hamsters, leafless bushes, and the spaghetti served on paper plates. By 1 o'clock he would be utterly beat, and the hours before bus time would be difficult and sad. But he must do everything possible for Marco. As for Daisy, it would spare her a trip. She had been many trouble. She had been many. Excuse me. She had been having troubles of her own. Her old mother having grown senile. Herzog knew of this from many sources, and it affected him strangely to hear that his former mother-in-law, handsome, autocratic, every inch the suffragist and modern woman, with her pince-nez and abundant grey hair, had lost her self-control. She had got it into her head that Moses had divorced Daisy because she was a streetwalker, carried the yellow ticket. Paulina, in her delusions, became a Russian again. 50 years in Zanesville, Ohio, melted away when she pleaded with Daisy to stop going with men. Poor Daisy had to listen to this every morning after she had sent the boy off to school, and was herself leaving for work. An utterly steady, reliable woman, responsible to the point of grimness. Daisy was a statistician for the Gallup poll. I'm sorry. Daisy was a statistician for the Gallup poll. For Marco's sake, she tried to make the house cheerful, but she had no talent for this, and the parakeets and the plants and goldfish and gay reproductions of Brock and Cleve from the Museum of Modern Art seemed to increase its sadness. Similarly, in her neatness, the straight seams of her stockings, her face with its powder, and the brows realigned with pencil to give more spirited expression, Daisy never overcame her heavy-heartedness. After cleaning the bird cage and feeding all her little creatures and watering the plants, she still had to face her senile mother in the entryway, and Paulina commanded her to give up this life of shame. Then she began, "Daisy, I beg you." And at last she pleaded on her knees, getting down with difficulty, a broad-hipped old woman, the white braids hanging, her grey-haired head long and slender, much feminine delicacy still in the shape of that head, and the pince-nez swinging on the silk cord. "You can't go on like this, my child." Daisy tried to raise her from the ground. "All right, Mamma. I'll change, I promise." "Men are waiting for you in the streets." "No, no, Mamma." "Yes, men. This is a social evil. You'll catch a disease. You'll die a terrible death. You must stop. Moses will come back if you do." "All right. Please stand up, Mamma. I'll stop." There are other ways to make a living. Please, Daisy, I beg you. No more, Mamma. Come, sit down. Shaky and clumsy, with awkward haunches and feeble knees, old Paulina rose from the floor, and Daisy guided her to her chair. I'll send them all away. Come, Mamma. I'll turn on the television. You want to watch the cooking school? Dion Lucas or the Breakfast Club? The sun came through the Venetian blinds. The sputtering, flickering images on the screen looked yellow. And gray, genteel Paulina, this high-principled old woman, iron at the core, knitted all day before the TV. The neighbors looked in on her. Cousin Isia came from the Bronx, now and then. On Thursdays, the cleaning woman was there. But Paulina, now in her 80s, at last had to be placed in a home for the aged, somewhere on Long Island. So this is how the strongest characters end. Oh, Daisy, I'm very sorry about this. I pity... One sad thing after another, Herzog thought. His shaved cheeks stinging, he rubbed them with witch hazel, drying his fingers on his shirt tails. He took up hat, coat, and necktie, and hurried down the gloomy stairway to the street. The elevator was far too slow. At the back stand he found a Puerto Rican driver who was touching up his sleek black hair with a pocket comb. Noses knotted his tie in the back seat. The cabbie turned around to look. He studied him. Where to, sport? Downtown. You know, I think I got a coincidence to tell you. They ran eastward, toward Broadway. The driver was observing him in the mirror as he drove. Herzog also bent forward and deciphered the name beside the meter. Teodoro Valdepenas. Early in the morning, said Valdepenas. I seen a guy on Lexington Avenue dressed like you, with the exact same model coat. The hat. Did you see his face? No, the face I didn't see. The taxi rattled into Broadway and sped toward Wall Street. We're on Lexington? Like the 60s. What was the fellow doing? Kissing a broad in a red dress. That's why I didn't see the face. And when I mean kissing, was it you? It must have been me. How do you like that? Valdepenas slapped the wheel. Boy, out of millions, I took a guy from LaGuardia over the Triborough and the East River Drive and left him off at 72nd and Lexington. I seen you kissing a broad, and then I get you 2 hours afterwards. Like catching the fish that swallowed the Queen's ring, said Herzog. Valdepenas turned slightly to look at Herzog over his shoulder. That was a real nice-looking broad. Stacked. Terrific. Your wife? No, I'm not married. She's not married. Well, boy, you're all right. When I get old, I'm going to be doing just like you. Why stop? And believe you me, I stay away from young chicks already. You waste your time with a broad under 25. I quit on that type. A woman with over 35 is just beginning to be serious. That's the kind of that puts down the best stuff. Where are you going? The city courthouse. You a lawyer? A cop? How could I be a detective in this coat? Hombre, detectives even go in drag now. What do I care? Listen to me. I got real burned up a young chick last month. She just lies on the bed chewing gum and reading a magazine like she's saying, do me something. I said, listen, Teddy's here. What's this gum? Magazines. She said, all right, let's get it over. How's that for an attitude, I said. In my hack, that's where I hurry. You ought to get a punch in the teeth for talking like that, and I'll tell you something. She was a no-good lay. A broad 18 don't know even how to shit." Herzog laughed largely from astonishment. "That's right, ain't it?" said Valdependis. "You ain't no kid." "No, I'm not." A woman over 40 really appreciates. They were at Broadway in Houston. A boozer, stubble-faced, jaws, strong and arrogant, waited with a filthy rag to wipe the windshields of passing cars, holding out his hand for tips. "Look how that bum operates here," said Valdependis. "He smears the glass. The fat guys pay out. They shiver in their pubic. They're scared not to. I seen these Bowery slobs spit on cars. They better not lay a hand on my hack. I keep a tire tool right here. Boy, I'd bust the son of a bitch on the head." On slanting Broadway lay the heavy shadow of summer. Second-hand desks and swivel chairs, old green filing cases, were exposed on the sidewalk. Aquarium green, dill pickle green. And now financial New York closed in, ponderous and sunless. Just below was Trinity Church. Herzog remembered that he had promised to show Marco the grave of Alexander Hamilton. He had described to him the duel with Burr, the bloody body of Hamilton, brought back on a summer morning in the bottom of a boat. Marco listened, pale and steady, his freckled Herzog face revealing little. Marco never seemed to wonder at the the appalling collection of facts in his father's head. At the aquarium, Herzog supplied the classification of fish scales. The cotinoid, the placoid. He knew where the coelacanth had been caught, the anatomy of the lobster stomach. He offered all this to his son. We must stop this, Herzog decided. Guilty conduct, an over-emotional father, a bad example. I try too hard with him. Valdependis was still talking when Moses paid him. He answered cheerfully, but by rote. He had stopped listening. Oratorical lechery, momentarily amusing. "Keep socking away, Doc." "See you again, Valdependis." He turned to face the vast gray court building. Dust swirled on the broad stairway. The stone was worn. Going up, Herzog found a bouquet of violets, dropped from the hand of a woman, perhaps a bride. Little perfume remained in them, but they made him remember Massachusetts, Ludaville. By now, the peonies were wide open, the mock-orange bushes fragrant. Madeline sprayed the lavatory with Stringa deodorant. These violets smelled to him like female tears. He gave them burial in a trash can, hoping they had not dropped from a disappointed hand. He went through the four-bladed revolver door into the lobby, fishing in his shirt pocket for the folded-up slip of paper with Waschel's phone number. It was still too early to call. Simkin and his client hadn't had time enough to get downtown. With time on his hands, Herzog wandered in the huge dark corridors upstairs, where swinging padded doors with small oval windows led into courtrooms. He peered into one of these. The broad mahogany seats looked restful. He entered, respectfully removing his hat and nodding at the magistrate, who took no notice of him. Broad and bald, all face, deep voice, resting his fist on documents, Mr. Judge. The chamber, with ornate ceiling, was immense, the walls buff but somber. When one of the police attendants opened the door behind the bench, you saw the bars of the detention cells. Herzog crossed his legs. With a certain style, his elegance never deserted him, even when he scratched himself. And dark-eyed, attentive, averted his face slightly as he prepared to listen, a tendency inherited from his mother. Very little seemed at first to be happening. A small group of lawyers and clients almost casually talked things over, arranged details. Raising his voice, the magistrate interrupted. "But just a minute here, do you say?" "He says." "Let me hear the man himself. Do you say?" "No, sir, I don't." The magistrate demanded. "Well, what do you mean, then?" "Counsel, what is this supposed to mean? My client's plea is still the same, not guilty." "I did not." "Mr. Judge, he did," a negro voice said, without insistence. "Dragged this man drunk off St. Nicholas Avenue into the cellar of premises at, what is the exact address?" "With intention to rob." This was the magistrate's overriding basso. He had a broad New York accent. From behind, Herzog was now able to make out the defendant in his case. He was the negro in filthy brown pants. His legs appeared to be trembling with nervous strength. He might have been about to run a race. He even crouched slightly in the big cocoa brown pants, as if at the starting line. But about 10 feet before him were the shining prison bars. The plaintiff wore a bandage on his head. "How much money did you have in your pocket?" 68 cents, Your Honor," the bandaged man said. "And did he force you to enter the basement?" The defendant said, "No, sir." "I didn't ask you." "Now keep your mouth shut." The magistrate was vexed. The injured man now turned his bandaged head. Herzog saw a black, dry, elderly face, eyes red-rimmed. "No, sir," he said. "He given me a drink." "Did you know him?" "No, sir, but he was giving me a drink." "And you went with the stranger to the cellar at address?" "Bailiff, where are those papers?" Moses now became aware how the magistrate diverted himself and the courtroom loafers with a show of temperament. These were dull routines otherwise. What happened down in the cellar? He studied the forms the bailiff had passed him. "He hit me." "Without warning?" Where was he standing? Behind you?" "I couldn't see. The blood started to coming down. In my eyes I couldn't see." Those tense legs desired their freedom. They were ready for flight. "And he took the 68 cents? I grabbed him and started in to holler. Then he gave me another lick." "What did you hit this man with?" "Your Honor, my client denies that he struck him," the lawyer said. "They are acquaintances. They were out drinking together." The black-faced, framed in bandages, heavy-lipped, dry eyes, red stared at the lawyer. "I don't know him." "Any of those blows might have killed this fellow." "Assault with intent to rob," Herzog heard. The magistrate added, "I assume plaintiff was drunk to begin with." "That is, his blood was well thinned with whiskey as it dropped into the coal dust. Whiskey blood was bound to shed in some way." The criminal began to go. The same wolfish tension within his voluminous, ridiculous pants. The cop, with pads of police fat on his cheeks, looked almost kindly as he led him to the cells. Lard-laced, he held the door open and sent him on his way with a pat on the shoulder. A new group stood before the magistrate. A plainclothesman testifying at 7:38 p.m. at the urinal in the lower level at 7:38 p.m. at a urinal in the lower-level men's lavatory, Grand Central Station. This man, name given, standing in the adjacent space, reached over and placed his hand upon my organ of sex at the same time saying, "The detective, a specialist in men's toilets," Herzog thought, loitering there, a bait. By the speed and expertness of the testimony, you knew it was routine. I therefore arrested him for violations. Before the plainclothesman had finished listing the ordinances by number, the magistrate was saying, "Guilty, not guilty?" The offender was a tall young foreigner, a German. His passport was shown. He wore a long brown leather coat, tightly belted, and his small head was covered with curls. His brow was red. He turned out to be an intern in a Brooklyn hospital. Here the magistrate surprised Herzog, who had taken him for the ordinary, gross, grunting, ignorant political magistrate, putting on an act for the idlers on the benches, including Herzog. But both hands, tugging at the neck of his black robe, demonstrated by this gesture, thought Herzog, that he wanted the accused man's lawyer to stop. He said, "Better advise your client if he pleads guilty, he'll never practice medicine in the USA." That mass of flesh, rising from the opening of the magistrate's black cloth, nearly eyeless or whale-eyed, was, after all, a human head. The hollow, ignorant voice, a human voice. You don't destroy a man's career because he yielded to an impulse in that ponderous, stinking caravan below Grand Central, in the cloaca of the city, where no mind can be sure of stability, where policemen, perhaps themselves that way given, tempt and trap poor souls. Valdepenas had reminded him that cops now went in drag to lure muggers or mashers, and if they could become transvestites in the name of the law, what else would they think of? The deeper creativity of police imagination. He opposed this perverse development in law enforcement. Sexual practices of any sort, provided they didn't disturb the peace, provided they didn't injure minor children, were a private matter. Except for the children. Never children. There one must be strict. Meanwhile, he watched keenly. The case of the intern was continued, and the principals in the attempted robbery appeared at the bar. The prisoner was a boy, though his face was curiously lined, some of its grooves feminine, others masculine enough. He wore a soiled green shirt. His dyed hair was long, stiff, dirty. He had pale, round eyes, and he smiled with empty, no, worse than empty, cheerfulness. His voice, when he answered questions, was high-pitched, ice-cold, thoroughly drilled in its affectations. "Name?" "Which name, Your Honor?" "Your own name." "My boy's name or my girl's name?" "Oh, I see." The magistrate, altered by this, swept the courtroom, rounding up his audience with his glance. "Now hear this." Moses leaned forward. "Well, which are you, a boy or a girl?" The cold voice said, "It depends on what people want me for. Some want a boy, and others a girl." "Want what?" "Want sex, Your Honor." "Well, what's your boy's name?" "Alec, Your Honor. Otherwise, I'm Alice." "Where do you work?" "Along 3rd Avenue, in the bars. I just sit there." "Is that how you make your living?" "Your Honor, I'm a prostitute." Idlers, lawyers, policemen grinning, and the magistrate himself relishing the scene deeply. Only one stout woman standing by with bare, heavy arms did not participate in this. "Wouldn't it be better for your business if you washed?" the magistrate said. "Oh, these actors," thought Moses. "Actors all." "Filth makes it better, Judge." The icy soprano voice was unexpectedly sharp and prompt. The magistrate showed intense satisfaction. He brought his large hands together, asking, "Well, what's the charge?" "Attempted hold-up with toy pistol, 14th Street. Notions and dry goods." He told the cashier to hand over the money, and she struck him and disarmed him. "A toy? Where's the cashier?" She was the stout woman with the thick arms. Her head was dense with graying quills. Her shoulders were thick. Earnestness seems to madden her pug-nosed face. "That's me, Your Honor. Mary Punt." "Marie? You're a brave woman. Marie, and a quick thinker. Tell us how it happened." "He only made in his pocket like a gun, and gave me a bag to fill with money, a heavy and simple spirit. Herzog saw a mesomorph in the catchword, the immortal soul encased in this somatic vault. I knew it was a trick." "What did you do?" "I have a baseball bat, Your Honor. The store sells them. I gave him a slam on the arm." "Good for you! Is this what happened, Alec?" "Yes, sir," he answered in his clear, chill voice. Herzog tried to guess the secret of this alert cheerfulness. What view of things was this Alec advancing? He seemed to be giving the world comedy for comedy, joke for joke, with his dyed hair like the winter-beaten wool of a sheep, and his round eyes, traces of mascara still on them, the tight provocative pants, and something sheep-like, too, even about his vengeful merriment. He was a dream actor. With his bad fantasy he defied a bad reality, subliminally asserting to the magistrate, "Your authority and my degeneracy are one and the same." Yes, it must be something like that, Herzog decided. Sandor Himmelstein declared with rage that every living soul was a horror. Of course, the magistrate had not spread his legs literally, but he must have done all that was necessary within the power structure to get appointed. Still, nothing about him denied such charges, either. His face was illusionless, without need of hypocrisy. Alec was one who claimed glamour, even a certain amount of spiritual credit. Someone might have told him that fellatio was the path to truth and honor. So this bruised, dyed Alec also had an idea. He was purer, loftier than any square. Did not lie. It wasn't only Sandor who had such ideas, strange, minimal ideas of truth, honor, realism, nastiness in the transcendent position. There was a narcotics record. That was to be expected. He need the money for the dope. Was that it? "That was it, Your Honor," said Alec. "I almost didn't try because this lady looked so butch. I knew she might be tough, but I took a chance anyway." Unless spoken to, Mary Punt said nothing. Her head hung forward. The magistrate said, "Alec, if you keep this up, you'll be in Potter's Field. I give you 5 years. In the grave. Eyes really empty, and this strained sweetness rotted from the lips. Well, Alec, how about that? Will you think? Be serious?" But where would it get Alec to be serious? What could he hope from it? Now he was going back to the cell, and he called out, "Goodbye, all. Goodbye." Surgery and lingering, "Bye." An icy voice. They pushed him out. The magistrate shook his head. "These fairies, what a bunch!" He fetched up a handkerchief from the black gown and wiped his neck, raising his chin and catching the gold of many lights on his face. He was smiling. Mary Punt still waited, and he said, "Thank you, miss, and you may go now." Herzog discovered that he had been sitting, legs elegantly crossed, the jagged oval rim of his hat pressed on his thigh, his striped jacket still buttoned and strained by his eager posture, which he had been watching all that happened with the look of intelligent composure, of charm and sympathy, like the old song. He thought, the one that goes, "There's flies on me, there's flies on you, but there ain't no flies on Jesus." A man who looked so fine and humane would be outside police jurisdiction, immune to lower forms of suffering and punishment. Herzog shifted his weight on the bench, forcing his hand into his pocket. Did he have a dime for the phone? He must call Waschel. But he couldn't reach his coins. Was he getting fat? And he stood up. As soon as he was on his feet, he realized that there was something the matter with him. He felt as though something terrible, inflammatory, bitter, and he grated into his bloodstream and stung and burned his veins, his face, his heart. He knew he was turning white, although the pulses beat violently in his head. He saw that the magistrate was staring at him, as though Herzog owed him the courtesy of a nod in leaving the courtroom. But he turned his back and hurried into the corridor. Thrusting aside the swinging doors, he opened his collar, struggling with the stiff buttonhole of the new shirt. The sweat broke out on his face. He began to breathe more normally as he stood beside the broad, high window. It had a metal grill at its base. Though this, a draught of cooler air passed, and the dust silently circulated under the folds of the green-black window blind. Some of Herzog's dearest friends, not to mention his uncle Arye, his own father, come to think of it, had died of heart failure. And there were times when Herzog thought he might be having an attack too. But no, he was really very strong and healthy. And no, what was he saying? He finished his sentence, however. No such luck. He must live. Complete his assignment, whatever that was. The burning within his chest subsided. It had felt like swallowing a mouthful of poison. But he now grasped the floating suspicion that this poison rose from within. He knew, in fact, that it did. What produced it? Must he suppose that something once good in him had spoiled, had gone bad? Or was it originally bad? His own evil? To see people in the hands of the law agitated him. The red forehead of the medical student, the trembling legs of the Negro, he found horrible. But he was suspicious of his own reaction too. There were people, Simpkin for instance, or Himmelstein, or Dr. Edvig, who believed that in a way Herzog was rather simple, that his humane feelings were childish, that he had been spared the destruction of certain sentiments as the pet goose is spared the axe. Yes, a pet goose. Simpkin seemed to see him as he saw the sickly innocent girl, the epileptic cousin whom Madeline supposedly injured. Young Jews brought up on moral principles as Victorian ladies were on pianoforte and needlepoint, thought Herzog. And I have come here today for a look at something different. That evidently is my purpose. I willfully misread my contract. I never was the principal, but only on loan to myself. Evidently, I continued to believe in God, though never admitting it. But what else explains my conduct and my life? So I may as well acknowledge how things are, if only because otherwise I can't even be described. My behavior implies that there is a barrier against which I have been pressing from the first, pressing all my life, with the conviction that it is necessary to press, and that something must come of it. Perhaps that I can eventually pass through. I must always have had such an idea. Is it faith? Or is it simply childishness? expecting to be loved for doing your bidden task. It is, if you're looking for the psychological explanation, childish and classically depressive. But Herzog didn't believe that the harshest or most niggardly explanation following the law of parsimony was necessarily the truest. Eager impulses, love, intensity, passionate dizziness that make a man sick. How long can I stand such inner beating? The front wall of his body will go down. My whole life beating against its boundaries, and the force of balked longings coming back as stinging poison. Evil, evil, evil. Excited characteristic, ecstatic love turning to evil. He was in pain. He should be. Quite right. If only because he had required so many people to lie to him, many, beginning naturally with his mother. Mothers lie to their children from demand, but perhaps his mother had been struck, too, by the amount of melancholy, her own melancholy, she saw in Moses. The family look, the eyes, those eyelights. And though he recalled his mother's sad face with love, he couldn't say in his soul that he wanted to see such sadness perpetuated. Yes, it reflected the deep experience of a race, its attitude towards happiness and toward mortality. This somber human case, this dark husk, these indurated lines of submission to the fate of being human, this splendid face showed the responses of his mother's finest nerves to the greatness of life, rich in sorrow, in death. All right. She was beautiful. But he hoped that things would change. When we have come to better terms with death, we'll wear a different expression. We human beings. Our looks will change. When we come to terms. Nor had she always lied to spare his feelings. He remembered that late one afternoon she led him to the front room window because he asked a question about the Bible. How Adam was created from the dust of the ground. I was 6 or 7, and she was about to give me the proof. Her dress was brown and gray, thrush-colored. Her hair was thick and black, the gray already streaming through it. She had something to show me at the window. The light came up from the snow in the street. Otherwise the day was dark. Each of the windows had colored borders, yellow, amber, red, and flaws and whorls in the cold panes. At the curbs were the thick brown poles of that time, many barred at the top with green glass insulators, and brown sparrows clustered on the crossbars that held up the ice-bowed wires. Sarah Herzog opened her hand and said, "Look carefully now, and you'll see what Adam was made of." She rubbed the palm of her hand with a finger, rubbed until something dark appeared on the deep-lined skin, a particle of what certainly looked to him like earth. You see, it's true. A grown man in the present beside the big colorless window, like a static sail outside magistrate's court. Herzog did as she had done. He rubbed, smiling, and it worked. A bit of the same darkness began to form in his palm. Now he stood staring into the black open work of the brass grill. Maybe she offered me this proof partly in a spirit of comedy, the wit you can have only when you consider death very plainly, when you consider what a human being really is. The week of her death, also in winter. This happened in Chicago when Herzog was 16 years old, nearly a young man. It occurred on the West Side. She was dying. Evidently, Moses wanted no part of that. He was already a free thinker. Darwin and Haeckel and Spencer were old stuff to him. He and Zelig, Koninsky. What had happened to that gilded youth? Disdained the branch library. They bought thick books of all sorts out of the 39-cent barrel at Walgreens. The World as Will, and Idea, and the Decline of the West, and What Was Going On. Herzog knitted his brows to force his memory to work. Papa had the night job, and slept days. You had to tiptoe through the house. If you woke him, he was furious, his overalls reeking of linseed oil, were hung behind the bathroom door. At 3 in the afternoon, half-dressed, he came out for his tea, silent, his face filled with stern anger. But by and by, he became an entrepreneur again, doing business out of his hat on Cherry Street, opposite the Negro whorehouse, among the freight trains. He had a roll-top desk. He shaved his mustache. And then Mama started to die. And I was in the kitchen winter nights, studying the decline of the West. The round table was covered with an oilcloth. That was a frightful January. Streets coated with steely ice. The moon lay on the glazed snow of the backyards where clumsy lumber porches threw their shadows. Under the kitchen was the furnace room. The janitor stoked the fire, his apron a burlap sack, his Negro beard gritty with the soft coal. The shovel scraped on the cement, and then clanged in the mouth of the furnace. He would slam the metal door shut with his shovel. He would slam the metal door shut with his shovel, and then he carried ashes out in bushels, old peach baskets. As often as I could, I hugged the laundry girls down in the tub room. But I was poring over Spengler now, struggling and drowning in the oceanic visions of that sinister kraut. First there was antiquity, for which all men sigh, beautiful Greece. Then the Magian era, and the Faustian. I learned that I, a Jew, was a born Magian, and that we Magians had already had our great age forever past. No matter how hard I tried, I could never grasp the Christian and Faustian world idea, for ever alien to me. Disraeli thought he could understand and lead the British, but he was totally mistaken. I had better resign myself to destiny. A Jew, a relic, as lizards are relics, of the great age of reptiles. I might prosper in a false way by swindling the Goy. The laboring cattle of civilization dwindled and done for. Anyway, it was an age of spiritual exhaustion. All the old dreams were dreamed out. I was angry. I burned like that furnace, reading more, sick with rage. When I looked away from the dense print and its insidious pedantry, my heart infected with ambition and the bacteria of vengeance. Mama was entering the kitchen. Seeing light under the door, she came the whole length of the house from the sick room. Her hair had to be cut during her illness, and this made those eyes hard to recognize. Or no, the shortness of her hair merely made their message simpler. My son, this is death. I chose not to read this text. I saw the light, she said. What are you doing up so late? But the dying, for themselves, have given up ours. She only pitied me, her orphan, understood I was a gesture maker, ambitious, a fool, thought I would need my eyesight and my strength on a certain day of reckoning. A few days afterward, when she had lost the power to speak, she was still trying to comfort Moses, just as when he knew she was breathless from trudging with his sled in Montreal, but would not get up. He came into her room when she was dying, holding his school books, and began to say something to her, but she lifted up her hands and showed him her fingernails. They were blue. As he stared, she slowly began to nod her head up and down as if to say, "That's right, Moses. I am dying now." He sat by the bed. Presently, she began to stroke his hand. She did this as well as she could. Her fingers had lost their flexibility. Under the nails, they seemed to him to be turning already into the blue loam of graves. She had begun to change into earth. He did not dare to look but listened to the runners of children's sleds in the street, and the grating of peddlers' wheels on the knotted ice, the hoarse call of the apple peddler, and the rattle of his steel scale. The stream whispered in the vent. The curtain was drawn. In the corridor outside Magistrate's Court, he thrust both hands into the trouser pockets and drew up his shoulders. His teeth were on edge. A bookish callow boy. And then, he thought, there was the funeral. How Willie cried in the chapel. It was his brother Willie, after all, who had the tender heart. But Moses shook his head to be rid of such thoughts. The more he thought, the worse his vision of the past. He waited his turn at the phone booth. The instrument, when he got it, was humid from the many mouths and ears that used it. Herzog rang the number Simpkin had given him. Waschel said no, he had no messages from Simpkin, but Mr. Herzog was welcome to come up and wait. "No thanks, I'll phone again," Herzog said. He had absolutely no ability to wait in offices. He never had any ability to wait for anything. "You don't happen to know. Is he in the building somewhere?" "I know he's here all right," said Waschel. "I have an idea it's a criminal case. And that would be—" He rattled off a list of room numbers. Herzog fixed on a few of these. He said, "I'll go and have a look around and call you again in half an hour, if you don't mind." "No, I don't mind. We're open for business all day. Why don't you try the 8th floor? Little Napoleon. With that voice, you should be able to hear him through the walls." In the first courtroom, Herzog entered, after getting this suggestion. There was a jury trial. He was one of a small number of people in the polished wooden rows. Within a few minutes, he had forgotten Simpkin entirely. A young couple, a woman, and the man he had been living with in a slum hotel uptown, were being tried for the murder of her son, a child of 3. She had had the boy by another man, who deserted her, said the lawyer in his presentation. Herzog observed how grey and elderly all these lawyers were, people of another generation and a different circle of life, tolerant, comfortable people. The defendants could be identified by their looks and clothing. The man wore a stained and frayed zipper jacket, and she, a red-headed woman with a wide, ruddy face, had on a brown print house dress. Both sat stolid to all appearances, unmoved by the testimony. He with his low sideburns and blonde mustache, she with blunt freckled cheekbones and long hidden eyes. She came from Trenton, born lame. Her father was a garage mechanic. He had a 4th-grade education, IQ 94. An older brother was the favorite. She was neglected. Unattractive, sullen, clumsy, wearing an orthopedic boot, she became delinquent at an early age. Her record was before the court. The lawyer went on, even mild and pleasant. An angry, uncontrollable girl from 1st grade. There was affidavits from teachers. There were also medical and psychiatric records, and a neurological report to which the lawyer particularly wished to call the court's attention. This showed his client had been diagnosed with encephalogram as having a brain lesion capable of altering her behavior radically. Spelt Encephalogram. Encephalogram. Or encephalogram. You work it out. She was known to have violent epileptoid fits of rage. Epileptoid. Again. Ditto. Here her tolerance for emotions controlled from the affected lobe was known to be very low. Because she was a poor crippled creature, she had often been molested, later sexually abused by adolescent boys. Indeed, her file in children's court was very thick. Her mother loathed her, and refused to attend the trial, was quoted as saying, "This is no kid of mine. We wash our hands of her." The defendant was made pregnant at 19 by a married man who lived with her several months. Then went back to his wife and family. She refused to give the child for adoption, lived for a while in Trenton with it, and then moved to Flushing, where she cooked and cleaned for a family. On one of her weekends, she met the other defendant, at the time employed as porter in a lunchroom on Columbus Avenue, and decided to live with him at the Montcalm Hotel on 103rd Street. Herzog had often passed the place. You could smell the misery of it from the street. Its black stink flowed out through open windows, bedding, garbage, disinfectant, roach killer. His mouth was dry, and he sat forward, straining to hear. The medical examiner was on the stand. Had he seen the dead child? Yes. Did he have a report to make? He did. He gave the date and circumstances of the examination. A hefty, bald, solemn man with fleshy and deliberate lips. He held his notes in both hands like a singer, the experienced professional witness. The child, he said, was normally formed but seemed to have suffered from malnutrition. There were signs of incipient rickets. The teeth were already quite carious. But this was sometimes a symptom that the mother had had toxemia in pregnancy. Were any unusual marks visible on the child's body? Yes, the little boy had apparently been beaten. Once or repeatedly. In his opinion, often beaten. The scalp was torn. There were unusually heavy bruises on the back and legs. The shins were discolored. Where were the bruises heaviest? On the belly, and especially in the region of the genitals, where the boy seemed to have been beaten with something capable of breaking the skin, perhaps a metal buckle, or the heel of a woman's shoe. "And what internal findings did you make?" the prosecutor went on. "There were 2 broken ribs, one an older break. The more recent one had done some damage to the lung. The boy's liver had been ruptured. The hemorrhage, caused by this, may have been the immediate cause of death. There was also a brain injury. In your opinion, then, the child died violently." "That's my opinion." "The liver injury would have been enough." All this seemed to Herzog exceptionally low-pitched. All the lawyers, the jury, the mother, her tough friend, the judge behaved with much restraint, extremely well controlled, and quiet-spoken. Such calm, inversely proportionate to the murderer. He was thinking. Judge, jury, lawyers, and the accused all looked utterly unemotional. And he himself? He sat in his new Madras coat and held his hard straw hat. He gripped his hat strongly and felt sick at heart. The raised edge of the straw made marks on his fingers. A witness was sworn, a solid-looking man of 35 or so, in a stylish Oxford grey summer suit, of Madison Avenue cut. His face was round, full, jowly, but his head had little height above the ears, and was further flattened by his butch haircut. He made very good gestures, pulling up his trouser legs, as he sat freeing his shirt cuffs and leaning forward to answer questions with measured earnest, masculine politeness. His eyes were dark. You could see his scalp furrow as he frowned, weighing his answers. He identified himself as a salesman in the storm window business. Screens and storm windows. Herzog knew what he meant. Aluminum sashes with triple tracks. He had read the ads. The witness lived in Flushing. Did he know the accused woman? She was asked to stand, and she did, a short, hobbling figure, dark red hair frizzy, the long eyes recessed, skin freckled, lips thick, and dun-colored. Yes, he knew her. She had lived in his house 8 months ago, not exactly employed by him. No, she was a distant cousin of his wife, who felt sorry for her and gave her a room. He had built a small apartment in the attic, separate bathroom, air conditioner. She was asked to help with his housework. She was asked to help with housework, naturally, but she also took off and left the boy for days at a time. Did he ever know her to mistreat the child? The kid was never clean. You never wanted to hold him on your lap. He had a cold sore, and his wife at last put salve on it, as the mother would not. The child was quiet, undemanding, clung to its mother, a frightened little boy, and he had a bad smell. Could the witness further describe the mother's attitude? Well, on the road, they were driving to visit the grandmother and stopped at Howard Johnson's. Everyone ordered. She had a barbecued beef sandwich, and when it came, began to eat and fed the child nothing. Then he himself, indignant, gave the boy some of his meat and gravy. I fail to understand, thought Herzog, as his good man, jowls silently moving, got off the stand. But this is the difficulty with people who spend their lives in humane studies and therefore imagine once cruelty has been described in books, it is ended. Of course he really knew better, understood that human beings would not live so as to be understood by the Herzogs. Why should they? But he had no time to think of this. The next witness was already sworn. The clerk of the Montgomery, a bachelor in his 50s, slack lips, large creases, damaged cheeks, hair that looked touched up, voice deep and melancholy, with a sinking rhythm to every sentence. The sentences sank down, until the last words were lost in rumbling syllables. An alcoholic once, judged Herzog, from the look of his skin, and there was a certain faggotry prissiness in his speech, too. He said he had kept an eye on this unfortunate pair. They rented a housekeeping room. The woman drew relief money. The man had no occupation. The police came a few times to ask about him. And the boy, could he tell the court anything about him? Mostly that the child cried a lot. Tenants complained, and when he investigated, he found the kid was kept shut in a closet. For discipline was what the defendant told him. But toward the end, the boy cried less. On the day of his death, however, there was a lot of noise. He heard something falling, and shrieks from the 3rd floor. Both the mother and the boy were screaming. Someone was fooling with the elevator, so he ran upstairs. Knocked at the door, but she was screaming too loud to hear, so he opened and stepped in. Would he tell the court what he saw? He saw the woman with the boy in her arms. He thought she was hugging him, but to his astonishment, she threw him from her with both arms. He was hurled against the wall. This made the noise he had been hearing below. Was anyone else present? Yes, the other defendant was lying on the bed, smoking. And was the child now screaming? No, at this time he was lying silent on the floor. Did the clerk then speak? No, he said he was frightened by the look of the woman, her swollen face. She turned red, crimson, and screamed with all her might. And she stamped her foot, the one with the built-up heel. He noticed, and he was afraid she would go for his eyes with her nails. He then went to call the police. Soon the man came downstairs. He explained that her boy was a problem child. She could not toilet train him. He drove her wild sometimes, the way he dirtied himself, and the crying all night. So they were talking when the squad car came, and found the child dead? Yes, he was dead when they arrived. Cross-examination, said the bench. The defense lawyer waived examination with a movement of long white fingers, and the judge said, "You may step down. That will be all." When the witness stood, Herzog stood up too. He had to move, had to go. Again he wondered whether he was going to come down with sickness, or was it the terror of the child that had gotten into him? Anyway, he felt stifled, as if the valves of his heart were not closing and the blood were going back into his lungs. He walked heavily and quickly, turning once in the aisle. He saw only the lean gray head of the judge, whose lips silently moved as he read one of the documents. Reaching the corridor, he said to himself, "Oh my God," and in trying to speak discovered an acrid fluid in his mouth that had to be swallowed. Then stepping away from the door, he stumbled into a woman with a cane. Black-browed, her hair very black, though she was middle-aged. She pointed downward with the cane instead of speaking. He saw that she wore a cast with metal clogs on that foot, and that her toenails were painted. Then getting down the loathsome taste, he said, "I'm sorry." He had a sick, repulsive headache, piercing and ugly. He felt as if he had gotten too close to a fire and scalded his lungs. She did not speak at all, but was not ready to let him off. Her eyes, prominent, severe, still kept him standing, identifying him thoroughly, fully, deeply as a fool. Again, silently, "Thou fool." In the red striped jacket, the hat tucked under his arm, hair uncombed, eyes swollen, he waited for her to go. When she left at last, going, cane, cast, clogs, down the speckled corridor, he concentrated. With all his might, mind and heart, he tried to obtain something for the murdered child. But what? How? He pressed himself with intensity, but all his might could get nothing for the buried boy. Herzog experienced nothing but his own human feelings, in which he found nothing of use. What if he felt moved to cry or pray? He pressed hand to hand, and what did he feel? Why, he felt himself, his own trembling hands, and eyes that stung. And what was there in modern post-Christian America to pray for? Justice and mercy? And pray away the monstrousness of life, the wicked dream it was? He opened his mouth, to relieve the pressure he felt. He was wrung, and wrung again, and wrung again. Again. The child screamed, clung, but with both arms the girl hurled it against the wall. On her legs was ruddy hair, and her lover too, with long jaws and zooty sideburns, watching on the bed, lying down to copulate and standing up to kill. Some kill, then cry, others not even that.